last week. So last week we spoke about Google search advertising. So this is, advertising to show up at the top of the results page, hopefully, when users are entering specific types of searches into a search engine. Today we're going to be talking about social media advertising, which, unlike search advertising, is not motivated directly by the user. It's actually, or typically it's not motivated directly by the user. It's actually us going to reach a set of social media users, hopefully potential customers for us, based on some targeting, on some targeting capable, or some, sorry, the way that we describe our customers. And actually a large part of the session, the back end of today, the second half of this session today, we'll be talking about exactly how we can target our audiences, because it's really the power of social media is our ability to really nail down on the way that we describe users. But that type of advertising, I think we touched on this in week one, it can be seen as interruptive, because when a user is on a social media platform, typically they're not on there to be advertised to, they're doing something else invariably. So it's an interruptive form of advertising, but it's very, very effective at proactively reaching the sort of target audiences based on our ability to describe them. So the reason I'm sort of saying this is that search marketing, is brilliant for when a user's already enter in the zone of researching, products and services that are relevant to us as advertisers, and social media advertising is great at reaching them, even in advance of them being ready to make a purchase. So they kind of work together and they support this kind of moving customers down a funnel process. Okay. So are there any sort of questions or thoughts before we get going with the first part of the slides? Okay. So as always, please jump in with questions whenever you may have them. Okay, so we're in week 6. We're talking about social media advertising. So let's just start off by talking about some of the reasons why we might want to consider social advertising to be part of our marketing mix. So building brand awareness, as we've just mentioned, we can not only push our messages out to the general public, but we can be quite specific about the types of people we want to reach. So it's targeted brand awareness really is what social media advertising gives us. It's obviously, when we pick the types of channels that we want to use, obviously different audiences are going to gravitate to different channels. So a business audience is going to be on LinkedIn, an older consumer audience might be on Facebook, a younger consumer audience might be on TikTok, and so on. So because we can do this targeting thing, we don't, remember from week 1 when we talked about suspects. So this is a potential customer who's right for us and we're right for them, but they don't know about us and we don't know about them. So the great thing about being able to describe a customer, even if we don't actually know them, is that now using social channels, we can go a long way to reaching them. And if we reach them with the right messages and we create that awareness and then we engage them, we can use social media advertising also to convert. So just to sort of, because this is a key point really. So I've just earlier on talked about social media advertising can create awareness amongst suspects because we can just describe people and then reach them with messages. If they click on a message or click to our website or watch a portion of the video that we're serving them, then out of that, using the tools that the platforms make available to us, we can build what's called targeted custom audiences. So we can say, of the 1 million people that were served my video, I'm interested in sending a follow-up message to the 100,000 people, so the 10% of them who watched more than 50% of my video. And now I want to send them a more nuanced message, a special offer or something like that. And so you can take audiences out of social media advertising based on the results of that advertising and then remarket to them. And when you present that second follow-on message, it's typically more likely to be a conversion focused message. So they're aware of us, they've engaged with us on some level. So now we want to try and sort of close them, or turn them into an inquiry, or create some tangible connection. And as I sort of mentioned, social media advertising doesn't live in isolation. The search advertising, obviously there's all sorts of forms of offline advertising. There's events, online, offline events. So it very often can be effective part of multi-channel campaigns, and MintTwist are doing that for many of our clients who are running offline marketing in conjunction with their online campaigns. And it can complement organic social. I think when we spoke about organic social, I said very often they don't need to be connected, and that's true, but it can complement it. Last week, one of the chaps from Met Film is in charge of running organic social for the Met Film Higher Education Institute, and he quite often boosts his organic posts so that a given organic post might reach 100 people. If you boost it for a relatively low cost, you can significantly increase the reach of that post. And this is not me saying you should do that. It's just saying, this is, if you look at this here, this graph, the very thin sliver of light blue is the organic impressions, so that the organic reach that a post achieved for this particular client. And with a relatively modest sort of spend, in this case, about £500 over a month, you can really blow up the views, that the reach, that's reaching 10,000 people a day instead of less than 100 or something like that. And then the other thing that's important to know is that the CPM, so the advertising industry will talk about CPM typically as the cost for reaching 1,000 people. It can be as low as £5. It can be potentially a bit lower. Different channels work differently. LinkedIn's typically a bit higher than that. But just to give you a sort of a benchmark, TV, or like, at a sort of lower level, not non-prime time, would be £50 plus. So it's still, competitive.
Elliot, I'm just curious. Do you have any control over who the ads get boosted to, the audience?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So in a few slides time, after we chat, I'm going to talk specifically about the targeting options. The targeting options that you have when you run advertising, like proactive advertising, is the same as if you're boosting a post. So yes is the answer. Yeah. So I think there are default options in there that say, do you want to boost it to your own audience and a lookalike version of that audience? But actually everything that I show you later, you can do as well for your organic posts. I feel like I want to add to that question, because the thing is, because obviously I've been interacting with some of the ICMA stuff, and I know the ENIT have been posting on LinkedIn as well. And that typically what you're doing in an organic to your own audience is probably not necessarily what you would want to send to a completely new audience. It's worth pointing that out, but the answer is yes. Yeah, and again, I think we touched on this in another week. So the organic reach of, for example, Facebook, but actually it's the same for all of the platforms, is reducing. So it means what this is saying is that, 9 years ago, if you posted on Facebook, of 15 or 17% of your followers or 16% of your followers would see that post. If you, for a typical average Facebook page in an average sector, you're now at, down to sort of, 2% or something like that. And the reason for that is a few reasons. It's a lot to do with obviously more real estate being taken up by advertising, also more people on the platform. So there's more messages and less room in the feed. So that's just to know. So when we talk about strategy and planning, I'm going to introduce him. We'll stop in a moment and we'll sort of go around in questions. So when we're planning a campaign, a social advertising campaign, we've still got to have in our minds, what's the key objective for a given campaign. And remember, there's a distinction here between strategy and campaigns. So a strategy might be this is what I'm doing for marketing across, like my full sort of customer journey. So always on advertising, or a 12-month strategy, or 3-year strategy, or whatever it is. And then underneath that strategy, you would have campaigns that work for awareness and consideration and conversion. And you might have some time-limited campaigns that dovetail with your offline events and things like that. So a number of campaigns underpin a strategy. But for a given campaign, we do want to select an objective, and all of the platforms will actually ask you for the objective, because it will default some of the setup based on that core objective. There's so many different platforms. Here are some of them. And we also want to think about our channel mix. So when we're thinking about strategy planning, obviously the objective, and therefore based on that objective, what is the channel mix? Because some of these channels, obviously, as you mentioned, some of these channels will be more effective for certain audiences, but they'll also be more effective for certain tactics. And then you think about the goal, the goal that it really is implied by the objective. So if it's an awareness focused goal, then the sorts of metrics, so the way that we actually measure the success of that particular performance, will vary based on the objective. So if it's an awareness campaign, typically it's about how many people can I reach. So it's about impressions. And impressions by themselves is great, but in order to make sure a campaign is optimized, remember last week when we spoke about AdWords, it's a marketplace sort of play, and social advertising, I won't repeat the way that it works out, but it's basically the same. It's an auction system, and there's a quality score that's in there. And so we want to minimize the cost per 1,000 impressions. So it'd be impressions and cost per impressions, cost per 1,000 impressions. And then if it's an engagement campaign, typically it would be clicks, or maybe possibly video views, or some sort of engagement metric, but let's say clicks for this particular campaign, and then cost per click, or cost per 1,000 clicks, or and then on the conversion, next week we're going to talk about Google Analytics, and we'll show how sort of goals can be set up on a website. And if it's fill out an inquiry form and that goal is completed, that's one conversion. If we've got an e-commerce site and something's purchased, that's one conversion. And so if that conversion's been initiated by a particular ad campaign, you would if we set up tracking correctly, which we will, you can look at how many conversions a given campaign has driven. Obviously, you look at how much spend went into that campaign, so you can get a cost per conversion, a number of conversions, and a cost per conversion. So what I want to say here is that because of the way these tools work, if you've got any sort of history of the tool, meaning if you've had an ad platform running for you historically, even if you haven't had that, because of the way these tools work, if you know what your goal is, like impressions, clicks, or conversions, and you know how to describe your audience, and you can give your agency or your team or your freelancer a clear budget, you can, by interrogating the platforms, have a very, very good idea about how much you will get in terms of impressions or clicks or conversions, or all three, in advance of running the campaign. The reason is sort of twofold. First of all, these platforms will give you a certain amount of benchmark data for industries. And secondly, if you've got your own, if you've been running campaigns for any amount of time yourselves, then you can go back and look at your own historical campaigns and make really good strategic choices based on what's happened to you in the past. I'll go really quickly through these last two slides. So the way that planning works is we want to know our objective and our goals. It's really important that you give a budget, because if you give the budget and then you give the audience, then your agency can obviously give some generic advice around which channels to go for based on your audience, and then they can interrogate those channels and say, for this audience, what are the likely impressions, clicks, conversions. You can even look at to a certain extent you can look at ad creative that's worked well, and sort of be informed by those sorts of insights. And then obviously what we want to do is then actually run our advertising, which I'll show you some slides in a moment where we can where you can visualize how that works. So a starter question then after my sort of blabbing, but remember, if you've got another question, another comment, please go with it. But there are businesses out there, and for me, this is an interesting one. There are businesses out there, and at the moment, probably most of them are e-commerce businesses that have so much visibility of what of the customer journey from the point of awareness to the point of sale, you know, and the lifetime value of that customer, that they can view marketing almost as a profit center. So they've got so much data that they can say, if I put in an increase of 10% onto my ad budget, I can expect my profit to increase by 12% over the next 6 months. And there are businesses out there, you know, and they tend to be, tech savvy businesses, but they are out there. And I suppose the question is, do you think at some stage in the possibly distant future, your organization could be in the same place? Should we come to Sandra? I'll pick on you first.
Sure. I mean, like having that much information from kind of a business point of view is intriguing. And I think, you know, ideally you'd want to kind of quantify as much as possible and kind of try to track as much as possible. Especially kind of being in the marketing and communication space, you kind of want to track potential customers and, you know, like everything as much as possible. So I think kind of, you know, like putting the effort in to do that would be kind of the ideal scenario. But then it really depends on how well you can segment that for an agency that's got as many different kind of prospects and customers as ours, because we've got so many different like business units or kind of practices that focus on very different things. So I think that would be really interesting, and I'd love to see that kind of data. But yeah, from a kind of, you know, consumer point of view, like thinking about all the different businesses doing this in the future, it's also really scary, because then you kind of become really trackable. So I kind of hope it happens, but I also kind of hope it doesn't happen, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah. Has anyone else got any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, we it was interesting. I had to justify something along these lines in January to a committee that I report into, and they wanted to see, you know, after a year of marketing, that, you know, it was a very, very straightforward question. You know, did we make more as a result of this advertising than we spent? And when we did the research, and we were able to, we're lucky in that one of the conversions that we have is a registration to a course. We have a number of conversions or conversion points. So people might do a test your knowledge question, or they might order a brochure, or there's lots of different little bits and pieces. But one of the conversions we had was registrations, and we were able to say, okay, well, we can directly trace back X amount of registrations to the campaign. Those registrations have a tangible dollar value on them, so they are worth Y. We spent A over the year. A minus Y equals a positive figure. Therefore, it was worth it. And interestingly enough, I used that to justify increasing the spend for 2021. And it worked, right? The committee said, yeah, okay, Lord, that makes sense. It was something that, I mean, I report into a committee mostly consisting of ex-bankers, so they like to see kind of black and white figures. But they were able to say, okay, well, that's great. So we can see that you spent this and you made this, and it's directly attributable to this campaign. Therefore, we will give you X amount more to spend next year, and we expect the same return. And this is all great. However, it doesn't always work like that. So, you know, this year's campaign, whilst we've seen other conversion points increase really well, so the amount of people, you know, for example, the bounce rate has decreased, the click-through rate has increased, the session times increased, all of these metrics have improved, except the number of registrations, which has actually decreased, right? And so the idea that you can use it as a profit center works sometimes, but there's stuff that I think you need to go into. You often need to go into far more granular detail as to find out why one little piece of this puzzle isn't working. And I think for me, that's the really fascinating part about marketing. Okay, so what is it? Why did this happen last year and this is not happening this year when every other indicator is going up? And that's, and to be honest with you, I mean, it's a few bloody sleepless nights and slightly talking around myself when having to justify to the same committee as to why it's not working, but it's good, it makes it interesting.
Yeah. No, look, it is. Look, obviously, I've been speaking about this a little bit, and it is a massive challenge. I suppose my question was a mischievous one in the sense that I think that in reality, for businesses like organisations like the ICMA, like Fin Partners, like Mint Twist, any sort of organisation where you've got, it's people selling to people and it's a staggered process and it's, it's not a commodity at all. It's a considered purchase. There's so much at play that in actual fact, it's probably, look, if it does happen, it's way off into the future. And we almost have to commoditize our services, which probably organizations probably everyone here wouldn't want to go down that road.
Well, I think the one other thing is that this profit center kind of ideal is slightly misleading, because there is a tangible equation you can use, right, which I used in the past, and it's not that difficult to do. If you've got anything that you sell for a set figure and you're advertising that set figure, then you can kind of judge it, right? What is less tangible, what is intangible, is stuff like brand awareness, right? So what value does brand awareness have? And when it becomes even more complicated when the brand that you are promoting it's a non-for-profit. It's a membership association. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, there is no, we're not selling widgets, so it's a slightly it's a good question, but you know what I mean. You can approach it from different angles.
Yeah, you're totally right. And look, I don't think anyone would disagree. There's definitely value. Building up equity in your brand and building recognition around your brand is valuable. It's much more difficult to measure, which you absolutely. But this type of advertising, it does support that. And the interest, keeping it on the key points that I want to deliver today. There's something called direct conversions, which can be measured directly inside the ad campaigns. There's something called assisted conversions. And we'll talk about tracking. You might have some questions about tracking. It was a big part of the conversation the other day, Big Brother and watching us and stuff. But the tracking capability of the ad platforms is already pretty sophisticated. And actually it's been increasing in sophistication, although there is some legislation coming down the road and there's regulations and things. But that aside, a lot of the tools using cookies basically are able to track if a user engaged with an ad or clicked onto a website and then didn't convert, but then at some stage a few days later maybe came via an organic search, like typed in the brand name into a search engine and then goes to convert. In some cases it tracks those conversions because it wants to show that the campaign's working. That's right. And in those cases, it will report them into the tools, and then an agency can report, or your marketing person can report on them. But there is significant evidence that there's significant conversions that happen that were assisted, but just can't be tracked, either because the user went to a different device, they were using a different browser, they weren't logged into the thing, and that is the hidden value of running these types of campaigns. And it's definitely, particularly if you have to justify this stuff, it's worth keeping that in mind.
I was going to say, without wanting to sort of digress too much, I'm just curious as to what your thoughts are about, legislation that is coming down the road. So obviously privacy is a huge issue, data privacy in particular, tracing people's, journeys through the various pages they visit and so on and so forth is always going to be a bit controversial. obviously, well, I mean, from what I understand, the less ability we have to track that people's movements is the less able we are to be able to trace them back to a particular campaign or a particular activity. So how do you see that influencing, your sort of industry in terms of digital marketing in the future?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So we for those of you who are doing advertising with us, if you haven't heard from us, you will be doing soon. There's regulation that's coming down the road. But Apple, for example, so the latest, if you use an Apple smartphone, the latest version of the operating system now says to a user, do you want to be tracked by Facebook's tracking code if that code is initiated? So the thing that happens here is that, when there are lots of websites around where it says, do you want to log in with your Facebook credentials? If you say yes, then you're essentially tying yourself very closely to being able to being tracked once you've logged into that website, even if you then move off. And what iOS is saying, because obviously Apple and Facebook on some level are competitors, so iOS is effectively pulling the plug on that when it's initiated from a mobile device, and that was already started a few weeks ago, and it will reduce the number of conversions that the Facebook ad platform can report. Facebook's obviously keen to work its way around that, so that there are changes that it tells to its agencies, and we've been implementing them for the platforms. But you will lose conversions. You will lose assisted conversion. Sorry, that's not true. You won't lose them. You'll still get them. We won't be able to report on them. It's not going to be significant at this stage because it's iOS specifically, and it's iOS 14. But it's a significant, it's a significant small impact. And if governments start doing some of the things they're talking about doing, then it could really change the game in terms of tracking.
No, good, thank you. That's you could get into a conversation about about it for a long time. No, that's interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Any other thoughts or questions or comments? We're going to talk. We're going to talk now about the next sets of slides that are all about tracking and targeting. And I think rather than me just blabbing on about it now, I'll just go through the slides and we'll sort of end, and then we can have a longer Q&A to finish. But just the heads up then, when I'm going through these slides, just rather than just so you know in advance, when you go into Facebook ad platform, LinkedIn, whatever, and you're saying, I want to target someone who's interested in sports, what's important to understand is it's not just what you put in your profile that is based on. It's not even just on what you do on Facebook that is based on. Facebook, the ad tracking that they give, Google, they're all the same. They will do their best to understand everything about us as individuals based on everything that they can track, which is not just in your profile, and it's not just on their platform. It's on all of the other websites that you use where they're able to track you. And that is the area of concern that some governments are looking at, because on some level, for a lot of people, so arguably myself included, that is, it's a lot of information that these platforms have on us. They're not necessarily, they're selling it in an anonymized way, but actually they're sitting on a lot of information about us as individuals. Anyway, that's just so that you know how this targeting works that I'm going to be talking about just now. Okay, so just for the purposes of today, I'm going to talk about how Facebook works in terms of the targeting capabilities, and then I'll talk about how LinkedIn works. There are lots of similarities. I won't talk about the other channels at this stage, but in the appendix of these slides, if you want to download them, or when you download them later, you'll find there's the same information for Twitter and for Snapchat as well, and there's also some other generic information I'll put in the appendix. Okay, so remember when we were talking about the objectives, so when you go into a Facebook, to the Facebook Ads Manager, it's going to ask you, what's your top level objective and what's your sort of sub goal, if you like. So it's either awareness or consideration or conversion, and then you can pick any of these things. So If it's a video, I might want to go for, video views is my primary goal. If I want to generate traffic to my website, this is a very common one for if you want clicks to a website. And then we spoke about brand awareness and reach. And all that the system will do here is just make some defaults about some of the setup on a given campaign. So remember the structure we spoke about last time. Inside an ad account, you've typically got an organization at the top, and that organization might have different business units, but underneath an organization, lots of different campaigns, and all of those campaigns together make up a strategy. So this is at campaign level here. So the important thing to say is the goal. So when you track a campaign, the total goals and the total performance is at this top sort of campaign level. And then if you remember from AdWords, we spoke about ad groups, and in exactly the same way, underneath a given campaign, you can have lots of different ad groups. So if we've got campaign targeting parents, we can have possibly 3 different ad groups, one that says parents of kids who are less than 3, one that says parents of junior school kids, and one is parents of secondary school kids. And you could have 3 different ad groups targeting with slightly different messages underneath the same campaign. Yeah. So, of all of the platforms, it is fair to say that probably Facebook has the best targeting capability, the most granular targeting capability. So on the top level, it's got different ways of targeting different groups, and demographic is one group. And then underneath demographic, you've got all of these subgroups, if you like, that you can target, an individual by. What is their gender, what is their age, what is their education, what is their financial status, if they're parents. But underneath that, you can obviously also get extremely more granular. And let me show you this next slide. So if, for example, you want to target parents, you can go with parents with, age, 0 to 12 months, 1 to 2, 3 to 5. So you can be as granular as you want. The other thing to say is if you want to target parents, who live in a specific location, who are a specific gender, who are, university graduates, obviously you could combine all of these things. And then you can use kind of Boolean logic. So you can say, I want parents who have kids between this age, but who don't live in, so you can also say who don't live in Greater Manchester or don't live in London or whatever. So you could be, very specific. And then as you go through all of these targeting options, it's the tool will actually tell you how many people will fit in to the targeting that you've set up. So the idea is you don't want to be too broad in a specific ad group, because if you're too broad, your message will be diluted. You don't want to be too specific, because otherwise you won't reach enough people. So you kind of want to be somewhere in the green.
Sorry, Ellie, can I just ask one question? Sure. When it comes to demographics, do marketing agencies normally supply that kind of information? Will they do that research for you as well, or is that kind of something that if you come to an agency with a campaign in mind, that they would really expect? Look, who you kind of have you identified your demographic?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think certainly Mintis, and in my opinion, pretty much every marketing and advertising and PR company around are probably going to want the customer to describe their audience in their own words. They don't need to describe it in the way that it's laid out here. But that it really, really helps, because ultimately, we as brand owners and marketers in our organization, we're probably going to know our customers hopefully better than our agencies. And then, so it's a really good question, but it's, the answer is, have an idea for your campaign, for that particular campaign, what your audience is going to look like.
Excellent, thanks.
No worries. So so demographic targeting is one sort of top level group, and then you can also target by interest. So again, this can be a combination of a targeting profile. It doesn't have to be demographic or interest. It can be a combination of demographic and interest. And this is where really it's saying based on user likes and Facebook activity, but actually it goes beyond this. And just in the way that the other ad platforms do, they have an idea about what websites you've been visiting, recently. Gmail advertising, for example, anyone who uses the free version of Gmail, there is, you know, again, I'm not sure if people know this or not, but there is AI that is literally reading our emails that we send to people and even that we receive. So you've got, you know, there is, they know a lot about us. So these are based on the interests of the particular user that we're targeting. And again, obviously you can break down. So if their interest, if we want to talk about travel, if we've got a travel offer of some description, we can go down and be really specific about whether it's adventure travel that we're interested in, renting cars, ecotourism, or, you know, or a combination of these things. And then the behavior targeting, I was just talking there about, you know, about how sort of Gmail works, and the AI is reading the messages that we send, and obviously WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, so you know that is being read by AI, so it can start to understand the behaviors of us as individuals in the context of, you know, any of these indexes that we're talking about here. So, you know, to give you, I don't know, there's no examples here, but on the mobile user device, so if you want to target people with iPhones, you can target people with iPhones, Android devices, you know, what football team they're interested in, and what, you know, and what specific sport in what country. You can get really specific. Then, so I referred earlier on to custom audiences. So this is like another type of targeting that, as I mentioned, is more to do with what has user interacted normally with us in some way or another before, but it doesn't have to be us. We can say, I want to target all users who have been on the Facebook NBA Facebook page, for example, or on the Italian tourism Facebook page. I want to target those specific people. But more typically, it might be something like contact lists. So if we've got a GDPR compliant email list, we can upload that list, you know, in this case to Facebook. The capability exists on other platforms as well. And we can, what the tool will do is fuzzy match all of those email addresses to specific user profiles on their system. Now, even if it's not the same email address, because of what I was talking about earlier on, because Facebook has so much information about us from so many different sources, it will understand that users might have 3 or 4 email addresses, and it will, you know, it will go a long way to trying to match those users. And then we can market to those particular users. We can more normally, a very classic way of running social advertising is running an awareness focused campaign that drives people to a landing page. And then when they hit that landing page, that's, you know, there's implied intent there. If they didn't actually convert, and you can, using the tracking code, we can isolate the people who landed on the page but didn't convert. So we remove the ones that who've already converted. We don't need to go back to them. And then we can run a specific campaign that says, go back to all of the site visitors with a follow-up message. Moreover, very often the way that you can do that is using the Google Display Network, which is kind of the banner advertising that we see on Daily Mail and Guardian and other places. And so that we're not restricted to the platform that originally gave us the original click-through, if that makes sense. Now, we do obviously have to take that audience data out of the Facebook ad platform and put it into the Google platform. But you know, that's relatively easy to do. Then there's lookalike audience targeting. So I was just talking a moment ago about uploading your customer list. You could do that, but instead of targeting those particular people, you can say, I want to target people that look like, from a targeting perspective, that look like those individuals but aren't actually them. And the idea here is that you're reaching customers that look like your current customers, or reaching potential customers. Okay, I'll skip through this relatively quickly. So there's lots of different types of ad placements for different, depending on your tactics, you would use you know, different formats. You know, video ads are very good for creating awareness. Now, you might not necessarily get that many click-throughs, but if you can serve up a nice video and then you can create a really strong custom audience that have watched more than 50% of that video. That works quite well. Image ads, although, you know, on some level they're quite basic, they're actually probably the best for conversion. So if you want to actually get someone to click through a nice image with a nice bit of text, and obviously a call to action, a CTA, which has you know, a bit of text and a button, these ones will convert or have click-throughs at higher than typically any other format. Carousels, you move across, you know, and there are some other formats, but I'll skip through these. The thing to say here about the lead generation ads is the thinking here, Facebook do this, LinkedIn do it, Twitter do it, they all do it now. Instead of sending a user to a landing page, the ad platform allows you to build on the platform itself a form of some kind, and that form can be pre-filled with some information from the user's profile, so the name and the email address. And the idea here is that because you're not sending the user off the platform, they're more likely to complete the conversion on the Facebook, in this case, the Facebook platform itself. And obviously, once the ad is processed, then the data is shared via the ads tool and can be forwarded via email as well. So the advantages, this is a Facebook here, then it's really, really targeted, you know, great targeting capability. Yeah, it's got, sorry, I should have mentioned this. Everything that I've just spoken to you about, it's for Instagram as well. So Facebook, when we say Facebook, actually it's Facebook and Instagram. It's the same ad platform. Obviously, it's a different social network, but the ads are initiated from the same tool. You can choose whether you want, in your targeting, whether you want to just advertise on Facebook or just on Instagram or just on mobile, you know, and all of that other stuff. Now, a lot of people say, you know, Facebook is just for B2C. And look, broadly, you know, yes, but actually we have found that as part of a channel mix, it can work for some B2B organizations as well. Don't necessarily discount it. Instagram is definitely a very strong B2C play. The thing to say is that Facebook actually are really quite strict about compliance on their ads. So it runs through a process, and you know, you've got to be whiter than white in the way you're doing anything. You're not allowed to be overly salesy, and there's a bunch of rules. But yeah, and obviously increasing amounts of competition is an issue for Facebook. You know, it's still valuable for advertisers today, but they're, you know, each year more and more are coming onto the platform. Right, I'll talk quickly through LinkedIn, then we'll go into Q&A. So same as Facebook, you know, you can pick your objective, top level objective, and your sort of specific goal, and then LinkedIn will get you some presets. Now the targeting here is, as you would expect, mostly focused on you know, on the professional description of its individual. So what type of job title do they have? You know, how long have they been working there? You know, we can talk about their education. Obviously, there's a certain amount of demographic targeting that we can do as well, location, age, gender, and so on. And then their companies, the companies they work for, potentially companies they worked for in the past, the companies they follow. And again, there's some interest data. I mean, LinkedIn is increasingly talking about itself as a content marketing platform. So the sorts of content that we as users are reading and sharing is all being obviously tracked by the tool and made available to advertisers for targeting purposes. The typical ad you'll see is the sponsored content. So that's just a post that's going to appear in the feeds of the target audiences that we're going after. This is an example of a lead generation form. So inside LinkedIn, just as we saw with Facebook, you can set up ads that will point directly to a form within the LinkedIn platform. So it's easier. It makes it easier for the user to share their information. In this case, it's just an email address, and everything else is, in fact, everything is defaulted. So all the user has to do really is press submit, and they can download, in this case, a white paper. And then you can also advertise on, you know, on the LinkedIn's messaging system. So sponsored emails can be quite, you know, effective. Text ads. So on the right-hand side, you can have ads pop up. Dynamic ads also pop up on the right-hand side of some of the pages. it's excellent targeting for B2B. So it's just a really good for anyone who's B2B, it does make sense. The cost per click, just so everyone knows, it is materially higher for LinkedIn. Probably, it's fair enough, because the audience and typically the sale value of the sorts of things that are going on LinkedIn are higher. So if a cost per click on Facebook is 50p, it's not uncommon to see a cost per click of £5, even higher in many cases. In some cases, quite a lot higher. We've found that there's not particularly great cut through for a younger audience, but that's just to know. Okay, so as I mentioned just before, so in the appendix, there's Twitter, there's Snapchat, and there's some more information. So we can go through that. You can go through that at your leisure. So the final question, just for as a starter for 10, is how do you think social media advertising will change? What impact do you think it will have on your organization going forward, advertising specifically? Sandra, let me kick off with you again, please. I think you're on mute, Sandra.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah. Sorry, would you mind just bringing up the question again? You know how much I like seeing the question.
Yeah, no. Oh, sorry, I'm not showing him. I brought it up for myself and not for you. Here it is.
I mean,
so how do you think?
Yeah, it's quite a big one, right? I think there's a lot of different kind of aspects that kind of go into it, and I think like the data privacy concerns are kind of one of them. It really depends on how legislation will kind of develop, and I think there's been a few changes recently with how the different platforms kind of handle it, with how the different let's say like mobile companies like address it. I think it also depends on how the different platforms kind of develop in the future. If there's like massive changes in the space, which is unlikely, but things like Clubhouse, for example, which we also mentioned, if they kind of gain more attention and kind of mind share, that will obviously influence kind of the current players. So I think it's kind of like looking into a crystal ball and making those predictions is too hard for me to do at the minute, personally. I think it's a really tough one.
Yeah, it is a tough one, and I Brian, I think you need to sign off, don't you? So please, whenever you're ready, have a lovely week, and I'll see you next week. Yeah, look, it's a tough one. It really is. Yeah, I think one thing to say is the concept of the social media networks being important to our lives. I don't think it's going anywhere now. As we saw even in the organic social media last week, they're edging towards penetration in most Western markets. They're still growing significantly in other developing parts of the world. You're right. There are some new kids on the block, and I think I briefly mentioned Clubhouse a few weeks ago, and that is an example of possibly the way that social networks might change potentially quite significantly at some stage. Yeah, I don't know. Alice, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with Sandra. It's really hard to say, and I think it's even hard to say because we're not Generation Z or so. Who knows what they're gonna use or how they're gonna use. I even don't understand why they use Snapchat or TikTok. I don't understand even if I look at it, but I know they're using it. And then it's a very different generation. And then I wonder what's next after that, right? What you're gonna have in place next year or in 6 months' time. But again, I wonder sometimes because when I look at competitors and I get all this retargeting, or even if I just look for normal shopping stuff and they retarget me. It's sometimes so annoying. And again, how long can we continue like this to bombard the customers with any kind of product, with all these advertisements? I don't know if that at some point will be like a big bang and it has to stop, or I don't know. But what's next? You know, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
But just to say, the social media
advertising,
advertising
it is really
works
important that
yeah, it works for us at the moment. You know, the paid social media, it works for us at the moment. But I don't know what the future holds. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, as you know, as you know, for organizations like universities, because you're going after, you know, so many targets, and then, you know, it as you say, it does work, and actually works very, very well. And so you kind of have to use it, and as us as individuals and as, you know, human beings and things like that. I think it is important that there is some form of regulation, because the next thing really is the whole, you know, obviously reading our texts and reading our emails, we sort of stumbled into it, but when do you stop? I mean, is it listening to this conversation now and recording everything, you know, that I'm saying, and using it, you know, to build out a profile? You know, that capability is already there. Now, it's not, you can't go into the ad platforms and say, I want to advertise to someone who's been talking about Coca-Cola and you've been listening to them on the Alexa device in the last week. You can't do that, but technically you could do it, if that makes sense. So if I was running one of these ad platforms, it would almost be a derelict of duty if you weren't sort of dark testing this capability. So it's really just regulation, or what, you know, regulation is probably the only thing standing in the way of that happening at this stage.
I think it's fascinating. You know, you see so many, you know, on one side of social media use, you're seeing such a movement for inclusivity, for diversity, for respecting people's boundaries, for all of this very, very positive stuff. Yeah. And it's all been played out on social media, and it's all very, very nice. And obviously there's an element of virtue signaling, there's some of it, but some of it, this is genuinely people wanting to, you know, become a more inclusive and a nicer place, a nicer society. And it's being played out on a platform which arguably has the power to be exactly the opposite of that. Do you know what I mean? There's this huge paradox, I think, at the moment. For me, that's the most fascinating. That's going to be the most fascinating development over the next decade, is how comfortable are we, on one hand, to talk about more inclusivity, more diversity, more acceptance, more rights, more this, that, and the other thing, and yet we're prepared at the same time to give away all of our privacy to corporations for money, you know, which boils it down to, right? I mean, for me, that's the ultimate paradox about this. What's going to happen? I mean, you're right, the regulation is going to be incredibly important, but how it goes is, it's this crystal ball thing, right? I think you're absolutely right. I think it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, it really will. It's that classic thing. Like if you're getting a product for free, you know, you are the product, and that is definitely the case for social media. So we're giving sort of, or at least accepting the situation for our own convenience, I guess. But yeah.
Yes,
Hannah?
I think what you said is really true, because I like I like adverts, for example, on Instagram. I find out so many companies that I'm interested in, being cake companies, being fashion companies. So it's useful for me, but how much I'm useful for them? You know, it's difficult then to strike a balance. You know, who's gaining out of all this? And this drive towards just being a product instead of a person is quite worrying in a way, you know. So there will be, I don't know how, but there will be more regulations, I hope, in this field. But to tell you the truth, I find them really, really useful. And for us, especially as Italian Tourist Board, being visually very attractive, it's useful for us to use Instagram, to use Facebook, to just target people and see, look how beautiful it is Italy. Come, come and enjoy Italian life. So it's a give and take, but I don't know, it can be a monster maybe if we are not careful. And this thing that, they know everything about us and we don't know about these faceless corporations, it puts us at a disadvantage, but it's a big question that I really, with my little brain, I cannot really solve. But definitely it has to be looked at.
I think you've made you made lots of good points there, but the one where you said, you like some of the advertising that you get, because the supporters of advertising, and I'm look, I work in the industry, so I'm on the optimistic side. If you get advertising right, it can be valuable and it can be useful. And if you think about brands, think about like Nike, as an organization, they are spending absolutely billions of dollars on advertising, because it's almost part of the service, it's part of the brand experience. And if they didn't do it, they wouldn't be serving their customers in the way that their customers expect. So there are some brands that have to, it's part of what they do. Literally, it's part of the product. So it's not all bad.
I think as well what you just said of the brand almost transforming into an experience or an event. I don't know what Gen Z will do in the future, but I have heard that this is a bit more what they're looking for, rather than being sold to. They're looking for an experience. That's also why they tend to, I don't know, I've heard as well, they tend to respond more to personalities who sponsor a brand type thing. So someone who is using a certain brand for something, and they tend to then try to replicate what that celebrity or semi-celebrity or something is doing, rather than responding to the adverts that, Stefania said, and I'm the same, we respond traditionally on Instagram and Facebook of thinking, oh, look, this is interesting for me. And obviously they know because you visited a competitor recently or something. So I think it seems like they're looking more for the sort of hidden advertising, where it's more of an experience type thing. I don't know.
No, I think that's a really good point. And actually, there was the conversation went in a similar way on Monday. So I'll share, because what you're sort of talking about there is almost like influence, isn't it? Influences. But actually, and a lot of my research comes from my Gen Z daughters, particularly the older one is very active on TikTok. But the truth is that the best influencers are very often not the massive celebrities, but it's the micro influencers who are very genuine and very authentic about the content that they are sharing. And moreover, my daughter was talking to you about, there's an e-commerce company called Shine, which targets, Gen Z sort of girls, like my daughter. And everyone who works for that company, even I think they have some physical stores, they're all expected to be influencers and active on social. So it's not that they are even an external influencer, they're essentially an ambassador for the company. And I do think that that Gen Z generation, when they're in the 30s and 40s and are running the world, I think it's going to be widely expected of people just to be active on social, representing the organizations that they are partnered with or work for, whatever term they'll use. And I think the sort of the rise of the micro influencer is a big thing. And in some ways, it's might be a way of combating the reduced amount, like capability, if assuming there is regulations that cut down the amount of targeting we can do. And that's not necessarily going to happen. It might happen, it might not. But using influencers would be one way of doing that. And just quickly to say, because historically the challenge has been that to work with a big influencer, is easier, because you only have to work with one person, and if they've got a big reach, that's great. Where that doesn't work is what you're saying, Marianne. It can oftentimes come across as fake, particularly, it's overt advertising. So there are a lot of influencer platforms, and Mintrist have started working with some now. for some of our clients, that where you it's got thousands or tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands micro influencers, so people who might have 10,000 followers, or even 1,000, lower, not millions, but tens of thousands, and they're very active in obviously different niches and all the rest of it, and they set themselves up on these platforms, and you can, as an advertiser, you can provide a brief, and you might get, instead of working with 1 or 2 big celebrities, you can get a team of 20, and these platforms are set up to automate the process of briefing them, of getting the content, verifying the content, tagging it correctly, and then paying them. And so I think that it's a really interesting part of influencer marketing that's going to become more accessible to advertisers, because the overhead used to be the admin of managing, working with 20 different people. You can spend way more than than the time you have in any given week. So and therefore the cost of accessing that type of influencer marketing has come down. And sort of, as I was saying, moreover, just actually, who do you have within your within your own organization? If you're a university, you've got student ambassadors, for example.
I think just to add to that, Elliot, I'm a perfect target consumer for all kinds of social media advertising, and I just about fall into Generation Z, I think. And actually, when I'm thinking about buying something, I absolutely go to those people that are influencers, if you like, and people that I follow, if that's clothes, if that's a different product, whatever it is, and I'm a complete sucker for it. And it takes one person that I like to be wearing it, and it's already been bought. And I think, just going back to a point that was made earlier as well, for me, I get that there are some potential concerns with them having that much data on us, but I think it's true that we as consumers are all changing, and we all expect so much more now. So I'm not willing to wait 3 to 5 working days for something. Ideally, I'd like it today, if not tomorrow, but last date I'm willing to wait is tomorrow. And actually, the fact that they serve me things that, I didn't realize I wanted it, but I do want it, I actually think it's really valuable. So it's a nightmare for bank balance, but I actually quite like it.
No, it's cool.
Can I ask one thing, Elliot?
Of course.
I've heard that, for example, in China now, the influencers, they sell directly on their posts instead of sending the person to the company. They just sell directly on Instagram. Is that true? Is that something that will come here as well, you think?
Yes, it's already, depending on exactly what you mean, it's already there. So yeah, Hannah will probably know there are influencers who will post something, and then there's clickable links inside the actual post, and then you click through and you can buy it. And even that integration, I'm not sure if it's actually built yet on Instagram, but it's definitely in development. I don't know, Hannah, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so you have to have a minimum of 10,000 followers. Once you've got 10,000 followers, you've got the ability to add a link, and then it's a swipe up, and that person will earn a certain amount of money depending on how many people buy through that link. And that's actually another thing, that if I'm going to buy something that I've seen on there, I'll actively go to that person's link and buy it through them so that they get some money out of it. But yeah, it's you've got to have 10,000 followers for it to work. Yeah.
No, that's really cool, Hannah. Yeah. So just to sort of clarify then for Stefania. So most of the influencers who are doing that, as far as I understand, I think Hannah's just said that as well. It's not that they're selling necessarily their own products. It's they are earning commission from selling products from someone else. Influencers who actually create their own product ranges, there are some celebrities that do that. That's another thing. In terms of micro influencers earning commission, there's quite a lot of that happening already, and no doubt it will grow. Yeah. Or any thoughts from you? Hello? I'm not sure if my connection's gone. Are you guys still hearing me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look. Any other thoughts or questions from anyone or insights?
No, actually very interesting. I just wanted to say thank you for everyone, really, for interesting ideas and thoughts that I didn't even think about before. And thank you very much. I just wanted, I can't add anything because really a big question mark, as you all said. And, but you made me think of other things that I never thought about before. So thank you. Yeah. No, in our little office here in London, we changed. I mean, it has changed us a lot in the last couple of years, especially, of course, because of the pandemic. But now it's everything is social, almost everything is social media and digital. And I realized that everything is much quicker, of course, now. Our job, everything has to be faster, and all the news and press releases needs to be really up to date to the second, really, because the social media, everything is really, and our work is changing as well, Stefania, isn't it? I mean, a lot in the last couple of years, I've noticed how we work as well. So who knows in future, but so far it's work, it has been changing, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
One thing, actually, just to add to that, and it might be useful for you, Flavio, but just going back to my point before about influencers on Instagram, actually last year, in the gap that people could go away, a hell of a lot of influencers that I follow went to Italy. And off the back of that, they weren't there promoting Italy, they were there promoting various different products. But being able to see different areas of Italy that I haven't necessarily seen before actually has made me want to then go to those places. And that wasn't the intention from their perspective. It was just somewhere nice they wanted to go. But there's kind of indirectly might be of benefit to you guys.
We did a sponsor campaign with Bean Twist last year on Instagram, and with Finn, with Influencer, another campaign. So, and it's working really, really well. Both did, and probably gonna carry on, especially in this period, because you can't really tell people to travel to Italy because it's locked down there as well. So you can't really, you have to be sensible as well. It's illegal to go on holiday, so you have to be careful and measure your words, really. So with just inspirational campaigns like this with Influencer, or with food and wine, or we were promoting actually with influencers different kind of themes. I mean, it could be food and wine, of course, or the art and cities, LGBT, or things that people don't even think that to go to Italy skiing, or to get to know Italy much better now through this period. I mean, we are at home. A lot of people are always on the phone and watching programs, social media, etc. So the only thing we can do is let people get to know Italy better. So as you said, you didn't know, you had no intention whatsoever to go to Italy, but you said, oh, you can ski, can you ski in Italy? I didn't even know, so why not? Let me look up to it, and yeah. So it's been working a lot, yeah. I mean, at least so far. I mean, nobody's traveled so far, so hopefully, hopefully soon they will do. Yeah.
What you say is true, actually, Hannah, because we actually have engaged one influencer who is a male model, but also he does his own fitness classes. James Yates, I don't know whether you know him. And we still haven't, he still hasn't properly worked for us, but it's been 7 weeks in Italy to work for Armani in Milan, and every day he was posting things on Milan. He made an incredible job, and obviously he's got a sweet tooth because he was trying all the patisseries in Milan and trying all the cakes. And it was really engaging. And I was saying, look, it's working for us for free, because it's not, he actually has to do a post for us. So what you're saying is an accidental influencer, let's say, for us. He was working in Italy and just posting about Milan. So you see. Yeah.
No, I agree, Stefania. It's really nice. Thanks, Hannah, for all of those points you made, because it's almost a definition of how it's that awareness marketing, and like the untrackable influence that it can have. And you described it perfectly there. So thank you for that. Any other thoughts or comments?
Elliot, I just have a more like not a technical question, but we talked about tracking the direct conversions, right? And then the assisted conversion, you call it, or assisted lead, right? Which can't be tracked or hidden value. So, but how can I, because if I need to prove ROI for my marketing spend, right? And I can look at all my conversions and we have a way to track it back to the source, lead, applicant, enroll student. But the assistant one, how can I allocate this? As in, it's the same if the brand awareness or brand equity is the stakeholders, they don't understand it because they don't see tangible results, right?
Yeah.
But the assistant one, is there a way at least to give it some value? Or I don't know.
Well, there's not a technical way, because if it was trackable, you could report it. But what you can, if you've got enough data, you sort of benchmark total conversions, you know, in a comparable period. And then you look at the conversions in the period that you run advertising. A lot of them will be reported. But if you've also got a general uplift over and above that, that's one way.
Okay. Yeah.
But look, in truth, it's really the best way really is to have a conversation, I guess, like this with them and get them to understand the concept, because most people will, once it's sort of, yeah, because it's logical, isn't it? It makes sense. It's the same with TV advertising, isn't it? You didn't track that back, but people still did it and it worked. So.
But can I add something about TV ads? Just because by chance I've been approached by Sky TV, and now they are proposing an Adsmart, they call it, that they target the viewers, so a sort of social media. Do you think that's something, instead of at 8 p.m. and it's 1 million 30 seconds, £1 million, but you know, they are targeting, and they're trying to explain me how it works. Do you think that's something that's
so we're yeah, it's definitely worth, sorry, Flavio, are you hearing me?
Now I can, yeah.
Yeah, Adsmart. Okay, good. Yeah, Adsmart is quite an interesting platform, because it takes the newer Sky boxes capture a certain amount of demographic information about their users, so you can actually be programmatic. So you can do a similar sort of targeting to how I've been describing for Sky viewers, meaning you can get a specific ad to a specific viewer, as opposed to traditional TV advertising, which was, you know, everyone gets the same ad. And actually, Mint Twist are a partner of Sky, and we have run these types of campaigns with Sky. Just like I've been saying, my recommendation is, if you've got a plan, have Sky can potentially be part of the mix, because you can also take, from my understanding, you can actually even take dates. So you can say all of the people who watched the ad on Sky, because Sky will also report who watched it, and then, for example, run a Google remarketing campaign to display marketing to those same people. So, you know, the answer to your question, I think Sky have been really innovative, and it's just another channel to throw into the mix. It's still a bit more expensive than the others, but it's, you know, it's high, you know, the perception value is quite high still, probably higher than an equivalent Facebook ad. So that's reflected in the price.
Thank you. Yeah, but social media makes change also the TV ads now slowly, everything, because they are trying to do the same way. So.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the new boxes that Sky started rolling out a few years ago. That's basically that was.
Do you think they can be as precise as with social media and targeting, or
not yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. But more precise than they used to be able to, than they could before. Yeah. So they'll probably always be playing catch up, just because of the nature of how you connect with via a satellite box as opposed to an internet connection. But there is increasingly good targeting capability for Sky and other set-top box delivered TV. Okay. Well, look, if there aren't any more questions, thank you so much for a really enjoyable discussion, like really enjoyable. And I'll look forward to seeing anyone next week. And obviously, as always, if you've got any questions, just email me and I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Elliot. Thanks, everyone.